So good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's session of the CBS Leadership Speaker Series. My name is Michelle Uvi-Molchai. I'm a member of the class of 2021 of Columbia Business School and the VP of Finance and Tech for the Technology and Data Analytics Association. It is my pleasure to officially welcome my fellow students, faculty members, staff, and esteemed panelists this evening. For context, the CBS Leadership Speaker Series was established to offer students access to those at the very center of business, giving us an opportunity to learn from CEOs, founders, and distinguished business leaders. Tonight, we will hear from Dean Maglaris, Professor Omar Besbes, and Brian Olsavsky, CFO of Amazon. After an introduction of our panelists by Dean Maglaris, Professor Besbes will lead Mr. Olsavsky in conversation about his professional experience at Amazon, work as CFO, and insights and lessons for current students. Guests will then have an opportunity to participate in a live Q&A session, so please feel free to submit any questions through the Q&A button at any point during the conversation. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce co-Cs Maglaris, the 16th Dean, and David and Lynn Silfrin, Professor of Business at Columbia Business School.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much for welcoming us this evening. Thank you also for all the work that you're doing at the Technology and Data Analytics Association. So welcome to all of you once again. Thank you for joining us in this evening for this Leadership Speaker Series event. We are very, very happy to have Brian with us, Brian Olsavsky from Amazon, and he will be joined with our own Professor Omar Besbes for what I'm sure is going to be an amazing discussion. I'm going to keep my introduction extremely brief. I want to share a couple of things about each of them. Brian serves as a Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Amazon. He's been at that position since 2015, but he has been at Amazon since the April of 2002, holding many, many roles in finance and global business services, including CFO of the Worldwide Consumer Business Group, and also Vice President of Finance for the International and North American retail functions. He also led the finance function for the Worldwide Operations Group of Amazon. So he has been, interestingly, and he and I had a discussion a couple of hours ago when we were discussing both what happened in the last 8 months, but Brian has witnessed the last 2 decades of Amazon. So this is a period of explosive growth, explosive innovation in terms of products, services, and the scale of the operation is just incredible. And it would be very interesting to hear about that journey and about sort of how things work and things that happen back in the mothership, so to speak. In his life prior to Amazon, Brian held a variety of financial and operational roles at Fisher Scientific, BF Goodrich, and Union Carbide. He is a fellow engineer. He has a mechanical engineering degree and an MBA in finance from Carnegie Mellon, which we will not hold against you, Brian. Brian, in addition to everything that I've said, he's an advocate and an ally, an active ally of diversity and inclusion across multiple dimensions, spearheaded the creation of the Women in Finance initiative at Amazon, an affinity group designed to build a community to provide opportunities for leadership development within the organization. So, Brian, thank you very, very much for taking the time to join us tonight, this evening for you. And now joining Brian is my good friend and colleague, Omar Besbes. Omar is the Vikram Pandit Professor of Business in the Decision, Risk, and Operations Division. Many of you, I believe, today may know Omar because you took his course in Business Analytics or Operation Management. Omar, and you'll remember him fondly because Omar is an amazing teacher who has won teaching awards in the core, and he's one of these individuals that has taught many courses and in exemplar way. And he was one of the designers of the business analytics class that many of you are taking or have taken in the past. Omar's research is broad and works in the interface between data-driven decision-making and applications that range from e-commerce, online advertising, ride hailing, and then more broadly sort of topics that are in the area of operations management. But he's one of the pioneers for the last sort of 15 years in this explosion of data-driven decision-making in operations and logistics, and both developing new techniques, but also applying them in practice. So thank you both very, very much. I very much look forward to this conversation. So Omar and Brian, floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Besbes, for the very generous introduction, but thank you, especially Brian, for being here with us. It's a great pleasure to have you and great honor also to have this conversation here today. And I hope we'll be able to build an interesting exchange as well. I know the students are very excited also to hear from you. And maybe just to get us started a little bit and for the students to get to know you a little bit better, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your career path at a high level and maybe the linear and non-linear parts of your career path, so to say.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Dane, and also Michelle. I would say, yeah, I've been at Amazon since 2002. So there's a heavy before Amazon and after or with Amazon split in my career. And it's getting harder and harder to remember the before Amazon, quite frankly. But in a nutshell, my background is I grew up in central Pennsylvania, went to Penn State because when you're class president and, captain of the basketball team and things, that's where you want to go, is go to Penn State. And, I took engineering there, which was, I think, really good because I'm probably at one theme that comes through my career is problem solving. And both engineering and business claimed ownership of that space. So went there, became a mechanical engineer, worked for a couple of years as a process engineer for Union Carbide, but then went back to business school at Carnegie Mellon, as Dean Costas said. I went there because it was a very analytical program, and I thought it would be a good, would build on the engineering base that I had. I was also very small. It's a smaller program. So coming from a really large public university, it was a good fit. I did work for Citibank in the summer between my first and second years. And I thought that was really interesting. I got to work on Wall Street. And I think I learned just enough to know that probably my skill set was going to be better in actually running or helping to run a business than to being in a kind of tangential role in finance, doing banking or consulting. So it's really set the tone for me when I went back for my second year, and I decided to pop out into industry, as we call it, and joined BF Goodrich in Akron, Ohio, which I just recently got married, and my wife was probably more interested. She would have rather gone to New York City, but we went to Akron, Ohio, and it worked out well. So I would say my career was, from a finance standpoint, there was about 6 years of individual skill building. I was working for the treasurer and the CFO of that company. And because it was a smaller company, I was able, and they hadn't hired a lot of MBAs, I was able to dive in and get a lot of great experience early on. I wasn't buried beneath classes and classes of MBAs. I did listen to a recruiter who called me about 6 years in and told me about an opportunity at a company called Fisher Scientific. For anyone who's followed that, they spent most of the 1990s acquiring and rolling up a lot of scientific and healthcare companies, distributors in the United States and Europe. I think that phase was more about P&L responsibility and starting to manage people. So it added kind of another dimension to my career. And ironically, I was building a lot of skills that would be valuable to Amazon and didn't know it at the time. Logistics was just a great field for me because it combined my engineering interest and a lot of numbers, both metrics numbers and dollars, dollar signs. And it was a real fertile ground for analysis and business analysis. And it's where I kind of built my early career. So when I came to Amazon, they were looking to add more senior leadership. And I was 39, so that at the time that was senior leadership for Amazon, but came in to start up this operations finance function. The company was a $3 billion revenue company and will be, over 300 billion this year. As Dean Costas says, I had a lot of progressive roles and managed a lot of the inner workings of Amazon on the way to the CFO role in 2015. I would say that when I first got to Amazon, Jeff Wilkie, who I was partnered with, who you may know, he was a CEO of our consumer business. He said, look, if we do our job right, there'll be, one of two ways that people will buy things in 2020 or, in the future. They'll either buy online or they'll go to a physical store, and they'll have both reasons to do both. So if we do our job right, this will not be a $10 billion company or a $50 billion company. It will be hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue and even trillions eventually. What that instilled in me was a real basis of Amazon's growth is that we plan for scale. If you plan to be big, you build things with systems and you hire a lot of software engineers to program it. Because if you try and do it manually and hack it together with processes, especially human processes, generally you can only reach a certain size. So super important to know where you're headed because it informs where you're investing and whether you're partnering with other companies or whether you're building it yourself. And for most of our lifespan, we have built it ourselves because not too many people can kind of keep up with our pace of growth. And we really, we're ultimately trying to satisfy the customer and the customer's demands, but and we hate it when a third-party company that we partner with, whether it's transportation or systems, whatever, slows that journey down. So back on my career, it was in this business finance role that I've spent most of my time at Amazon. The areas I manage now as the CFO include all finance functions. So there's tax, treasury, accounting, investor relations, and a lot of business services that we do. Things like we run real estate for the company. We run finance operations and pay bills. And we also do benchmarking and other things. So it's quite a robust area of the company. About 10,000 people at Amazon are employed in these groups right now. But at its core, what we're doing is, again, running the businesses we own really well and developing businesses that we're in to make the financial model better as we delight the customer. And then consciously picking big investments for the future. Nowadays, they're getting bigger and bigger. New countries, electronic vehicles, transportation, doing our own transportation, doing it globally. So I would say, it's been a great ride, but it never feels like it's over. It's every day is a new challenge. At its core, I think what my interests and my skill sets are around solving problems at scale. And what I've been given the opportunity to do at Amazon, and actually at Fisher Scientific before it, was to see a business that was growing very rapidly. So Amazon has grown, the top line's grown greater than 30% compounded annual growth rate since I walked in the door. Fisher Scientific had grown at a high clip in the 90s. So what I can tell you is if you're in doubt between two jobs or two companies, look for growth because it creates opportunity. It creates more learning because it creates a lot of experiments. And whether you fail or succeed, you're learning in all those experiments. So it's actually more dangerous to yourself in your career to be in a kind of static business that doesn't see challenges because maybe, again, you're not learning at the same clip as a faster moving company.
Thank you. I think, there's a lot of great advice and lessons, I think, for students as you think about experimenting and trying out things. And I think we will come back also a little bit to, this culture at Amazon and some of the principles that push or that, let's say instill these ideas. Maybe before we go there at a higher level, having evolved through all these years at Amazon in a period of tremendous growth, as you said, but also tremendous transformations across different industries. How has your, I would say, leadership philosophy evolved over the course of the past 18 years, so to say?
Yeah. Well, I would say, early on when I joined, nothing was guaranteed. The company was catching on with customers, but spending a lot of money and losing a lot of money, quite frankly. So most of our models that we get into, especially the retail models, involve heavy investment up front as you build your websites and build your fixed cost structure. And then if you're attracting customers, demand goes up, you reach a break-even point, and then you start to make money. And then kind of amplifiers off that for us historically have been things like third-party shipments, which we don't have to touch as much and make more on a per unit basis. And probably over the last decade, advertising. Advertising, we have always generating a lot of traffic and a lot of eyeballs, but now customers are coming. They're not starting Google Shopping; they're coming straight to Amazon to look for things. And we have a lot of point of attack advertising that is easy to monetize, but also very helpful for the customer. So that has changed a bit. The ebbs of flow of kind of breaking even and then reinvesting continue, but at our scale now, there's a healthy amount of income and cash flow left over, even with that level of experimentation. But if you step back and say kind of what ties it all together, there are these leadership principles that we talk about that are very important to articulating what our philosophy is, not the least of which is customer obsession and frugality, two things that kind of just went hand in hand with my last comments. But we use these leadership principles to evaluate new hires. We use it to evaluate ourselves. And what's great from my standpoint as we grow so quickly is it creates a common language across all of our entities. So we have a culture that writes documents and communicates in written form for the most part. And in those documents is always a healthy amount of commonality with these leadership principles, especially along the dimensions of customer obsession, bias for action, inventing and simplify, to name a few. So that's been super helpful as we have grown and scaled. But I would say, it is difficult sometimes to look back because so much is still in front of you. And I would say, it's never a dull moment. So that's gets you out of bed every day and, you smile on the way to work. In this case, I walk 10 feet from my bedroom to my office, but I'm happy.
Speaking about never having a dull moment, I mean, this year has been, a very special year in many regards. I mean, and a very challenging one as well. And I mean, maybe just reflecting just on the past 6 months or 9 months, what were some of the, I would say, lessons that came out of the current crisis, but also from previous crises that you were able to potentially apply when faced with a new crisis like the one we've lived?
Yeah. And again, I've been here long enough to see multiple crises, but let's go back to the 2008, fall of 2008. So it seems to happen right before a presidential election, I guess. But, companies were going under. Lehman went under, I think, in October, and the economy froze up a bit, and there wasn't this level of government funding and bailout to support the economy as much as there is today. And what we saw immediately was demand drop. So, if we're used to 50% sales growth year over year, it went to probably 10 to 15% is my recollection. It wasn't zero, but we were not printing money by any means. We had a lot of investments in play even at that point, obviously. So our first reaction was to retrench a bit and stop spending, lower marketing costs, not freeze hiring, but slow hiring. And I do remember actually in 2009, we had a pretty good year because the market, the top line did come back and we had lower levels of spending. So in some respects, it was not a bad year, but it didn't give us a lot of lessons for this year. So this year, the opposite happened. The top line demand exploded. Every model that we have, from grocery delivery to video content, I think every model jumped ahead like a year to 2 years as far as adoption and usage. So that had, in some cases it was easy to add, twice as many Twitch users or twice as many video eyeballs. But on the FC world, it was not easy. We had, step up in demand. You can see our revenue's grown 40 to 50% each quarter since March. Generally, we're used to 20% growth, and again, 50% on a large base in the U.S. So it's it's actually in all countries. So it was a severe test, and compounding that was the risk to our employees. Everyone was frozen in place in early March. It was, do I leave my house? Do I not leave my house? Do I go to work? Our employees were essential employees, and they're quite brave in that regard. And we quickly modified a lot of our processes for social distancing, added masks, added cleaning supplies. I would say, when we look back, we can see that our levels of infection and in our warehouses is actually less than the community as a whole. So I don't believe that means it's safer to come to the warehouse than to go to work, than to stay at home. But we are proud of the fact that we've been able to isolate people, keep them separate. When someone tests positive, we have the ability to let them go home, stay home for 14 days. So a lot of creativity around the safety and process standpoint, at the same time that we were handling, just a real step up in demand. All plans for the years were out the window. And we've been running kind of at holiday level volumes since likely the second or third week of March.
And just switching gears slightly to maybe some questions regarding culture, and indeed another topic that came up quite prominently this year is the topic of diversity and inclusion. And could you be able to comment a little bit on Amazon's efforts and maybe your personal efforts as well? And I know you've been involved for a long time in promoting diversity and inclusion and also creating communities in that regard.
Well, I don't think it was just Amazon. I think when people saw George Floyd, the tape of George Floyd being, crushed to death, literally, and not being able to help. And that was a series of, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, there's unfortunately a list that goes back to Ferguson. It goes back, decades. And I think the collective opinion of most people is horror that this is still going on in 2020 in the United States, and how can we help? And what are the core, what causes this, lack of wealth creation, fighting, police brutality? Why is voting still, voting rights still being fought for in this day and age? So I think the whole nation actually came to a, broad understanding in late May. I think what it turned into is a period of introspection at Amazon. If the population in the United States is, I think, roughly 13 to 14% Black, our employee base is closer, I believe, to 25 to 26%, but heavily, biased by our operations and logistics organizations. Just like every other dimension of diversity, it gets worse as you go up through the company, all the way to the top. So that's where we started. We set goals for doubling the number of Black vice presidents and directors, are our two highest levels at Amazon. Doing it this year, doing it quickly, and doing it again next year until we get some level of equity and parity. It's very important to have, as you're trying to hire people at every level, that there's senior role models that they can look to and say, hey, I see myself in that person, whether it's a woman or person of color. So we'd like to talk about having good intentions versus building mechanisms to actually make sure things happen. And this was the case where we said, look, there's probably been good intentions for too long, and it's not enough. We have to build mechanisms to help here. So there's a lot of goals that were set up mid-year. There's a lot of learning. I mean, we had a great series of presentations on Juneteenth that, again, looked at where we are as a country and the source, why we're in this position. Again, and it roots, the roots of this span all the way back to slavery. But at the end of slavery, there was no magic wand that made everyone equal. And there was actually, as anyone who's read about this, there were Black people's rights have been undermined ever since. So again, there's a lot of work to do. I think what we learned and what I learned personally is that, Black people are tired of having to carry the load on this, to educate white people to, again, at different points in the journey. So it's up to all of us to educate ourselves very quickly and then figure out how we can help. One thing that my staff and I did was we started having some book clubs on different topics, in addition to the heavy lifting of working to hire and train a lot of new employees. But we looked at we read a book called The Black Tax. It's called it's called The Black Tax: The Cost of Being Black in America by Sean Rochester. I would encourage you all to read it, but I'll give you the punchline of it. It's essentially that on most key dimensions of representation, wealth creation, home ownership, you name it, the Black population has about 2% of everything. And I told you there's about 14% of the population. So there's a lot we can do to help Black-owned businesses. There's a lot we can do to help drive equality and equity in big companies like Amazon and other universities like Columbia. So I think from the wreckage of this year is going to be a lot of positive movement. It's clear though that we can't let up either, because again, the riots in Ferguson, Missouri were, I think, 2015-ish. People, if you move the spotlight to something else, you don't make progress. So that's what we're trying to do, is build mechanisms, make progress, and keep the pressure on in this area.
Thank you for these thoughts, and also seeing the role that every individual, but also organizations, have to play here. And in terms of, on this topic of allyship, I see that you're also the sponsor for an affinity group called Women in Finance, or Wi-Fi. I don't know if that's how we pronounce it.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your role there and the role of that group?
Yeah, it was part of my, this is a true story. When I took over as CFO, we had a number of things that we said we're going to try and, double down on our, some of our programs around training and development, work-life harmony, career growth. And we called it Making Finance Great. And then Donald Trump came along and, turned that into making America great again. And it ruined our whole marketing plan went out the window. But one of the things that I take credit for promoting it, but not starting it or thinking of it, was the Women in Finance Initiative. So it was about the same time that I was taking over as CFO in early 2015. I would say that we had about 40% of finance was female. Not bad for a tech company, but we certainly could do better. And we saw the same issues of senior level representation. I had one female VP out of 16. Today we have about a third out of about 10 out of 30 are female. And we, that was one positive mechanism outcome that's, I think a good sign for us. At the time I thought, okay, this is, I'm an engineer, it's a problem, maybe we can solve this. Let's just focus on recruiting. We should be able to make sure that our business school recruiting and our undergrad recruiting is 50-50 on a male-female basis, or even perhaps higher. And I think, females are maybe closer to 52 to 54% of the undergrad population in finance and accounting. And the team the women at Amazon were quick to educate me, and they said, look, that may work and that's good, but we're here already. So this is not necessarily about recruiting us, we're here. It's about retention and advancement and making sure that our there's not hidden biases in our promotion process, or there's other barriers that women have to overcome. A big one was child rearing, because unfortunately that falls a lot on the women in business. And they would say, look, I can work, this is not a place I can work, between 30 and 40 when I'm having children, because I just can't maintain it. So what are you going to do? Hire me back when I'm 40 and we're done having children, or what? And I say that knowing that, men also handle child rearing as well. But they brought up good points. They pushed a lot of discussion about leave policies, work from home. Ironically, I think the work from home will actually now turbocharge based on the pandemic and how we see how effective it is. But I think the biggest thing I give this group credit for is they not only advocated for women's issues, but they were a catalyst for a lot of other stuff. Like they are always having presentations around learning and development, career growth. Even this year, a lot of things around stress management and managing during a pandemic. So they're really just this great group of, and it's not even all women. Half of, probably 30% of the Wi-Fi group is men. So it's been a big rallying cry. And I actually wish, in hindsight, that we had as much momentum around other diversity areas 5 years ago. And it's not like starting from a dead start this year, but we definitely have to catch up and do so quickly.
Thank you. Now, if you think about our students who are trying to develop and developing all kinds of problem-solving skills, as you mentioned earlier, like as they go forward, I mean, when we witness Amazon, Amazon is a company that has innovated on many fronts in terms of strategy and this customer obsession, and really starting from the customer as opposed from these internal processes. It has reimagined processes to be able to deliver within a day. And it has also reimagined businesses or expanded across businesses in a way that is quite unique. So, one question that comes to mind is there's the problem-solving skills, but also what is the culture that can enable such a fast pace of innovation within the same company? And
I think, I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Omar? Did I cut you off?
Go ahead. I was just thinking, what's the role of, as an individual within such an organization, how can we be part of this, I would say, innovative enterprise?
Yeah, I think it starts from the customer, not only from just the leadership principle of customer obsession. Anytime we do something, we work backwards from the customer experience and we say, well, what would if we're successful and launch this thing, what would the press release say? What would the customer value be for whatever it happens to be, a new video service, a new transportation mode? And it's amazing how that crystallizes your thought around the customer and creates a lasting document that you can refer back to. Because I think a lot of times when I see in other companies, you and I may think we're in sync, but as time goes on, you heard one thing, I heard another, and you kind of figure out, you get to a point where you're like, okay, which came first, the chicken or the egg here? Are we, and so I think it's a crystallizing document and process. But this place is full of inventors. And again, we're not limited generally in our, when we look at investment thresholds, we don't really just say, hey, we're out of money, sorry. We usually say we're out of people or we're out of management bandwidth, and we're out of software engineers who are the lifeblood of building a lot of things in this space. So, invention is high here, and good ideas compete against each other for funding and staffing. So that process usually creates good winners and not even losers. Sometimes we'll revector or come back to fight another day on something. We did that with international expansion. We're now expanding in places like Australia and Brazil and Turkey and even Sweden, I think a couple of weeks ago. And you may say, well, geez, gosh, Amazon's been around for 25 years. Why did it take so long? And it's just, there's only so many people that we can put at different problems. So I would say invention is at the core here. And there's no area that is devoid of invention. Like if I look back in the mid 2000s, I would say probably the most at-risk business was physical books and music and video. We're building Kindles, everything's going electronic, digital, nothing is, no one's buying CDs anymore. People still buy books, which is, has gone against the grain a little bit. But what I saw, I thought, okay, well, those people must be where there's no innovation, right? That whoever wants to work in physical books is self-selecting into something that's, slower paced. And it's not the case. They got into textbooks, and they got into textbook rental, and they got into selling used video games and things. So there's like no area of this company that there isn't innovation. And then people jump between groups. So it's not like we say, okay, we have enough people, we're going to lay off this group. Usually people migrate to their highest and best use. So I think that the having a founder who's still CEO and highly involved and still owns over 10% of the company, and more importantly, laid out a vision in 1997 in his first shareholder letter saying, we're in this for the long run, don't expect short-term profits, and you start to worry more when we run out of ideas, right? So, he set the tone. We got we got investors who are along for that ride. And I realize not every company has that luxury, and they're more beholden to quarterly earnings, and maybe management teams turn over more quickly because of that. I think the stability of Amazon and the long-range vision and the ability to lose money on good ideas that will, really attract customers and have good long-term free cash flow potential is really the kind of the magic sauce here at Amazon.
Then maybe related to, so here you spoke a lot about this think big or so principle, and we go through this other part that struck me a little bit in the management principles, which is leadership principle, which is associated with humility. But it's deep dive. No task is beneath you, or learn and be curious. In some sense, this continuously challenging yourself. I mean, maybe can you speak also a little bit about that with regard to your own personal experience, and maybe as advice to our future graduates, many of whom will join Amazon, actually?
Yeah, I think that's important. We fight bureaucracy here. We don't want to have layers and layers of people who increasingly don't know what's going on and are getting distant from both the front line and also customers. So we talked a lot about management, I forget what we call it, but I have 12 or 13 direct reports, right? There's no way I can micromanage 12 or 13 people. And that's good because it makes me pick my spots, and it allows them to lead and to flourish, right? So we have span of control discussions. That was the word I was looking for. So yeah, I think that is a big part of the success for us. I forget the early part of the question. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
The idea of some kind of humility, right? So trying to continue to learn yourself, try to learn. And this is essentially, in some sense, for a lot of our graduates, they're investing in their learning right now. But I think one of the messages is learning continues.
Without a doubt. And that humility, I think I look in the mirror each year and say, am I 30% better this year because the business is 30% better? Again, I joined a $3 billion revenue company, and we're well over 300 billion today. It's not clear that everyone can scale to that. So you challenge yourself to scale. You make mid-course corrections. I've learned that I can't do everything myself. I've gotten a lot better at delegating. I pick my spots. I worry about finance issues, because if I don't think of those, it'll probably likely be solved 12 different ways in 12 different groups. So I'm more about finding out who's doing it best and then standardizing it. So yeah, you really have to push yourself on kind of what you don't see, what the blind spots are. You have to disprove we work hard to disprove our ideas and our prejudices and biases. So, and there's a lot of people who do that for you, because it's a very smart, the average intelligence around here is off the charts as well. So, it's a privilege to work at Amazon. It's a challenge, and it keeps you at a high bar. And I say that, 2 of my children worked here earlier in their career, and they were debating other companies, and I was thinking myself, do I want them to work at Amazon or not? It's is it odd? They didn't get a job because of me. They got a job because they went to good universities. But I thought, hey, I would rather them have a very high standard of work and work with smart people and get that early on in their career, before they go back to business school, then have them start at a company that maybe isn't as inventive, and they might be the smartest person in that company or that class, and that's not a good place to be. So I've kind of used it with my own children, knowing that they could have sunk or swum here as well, just because, again, but luckily they've learned really good skills about the importance of data and making arguments with data, the importance of customer experience as kind of a core principle of doing business. And hopefully they haven't seen a lot of bureaucracy. They certainly have a different view of the organization than I do, and I learn a lot from listening to them and kind of their view of things. So it's been educational for me as well.
And in terms of like looking forward a little bit over the next 5 years, let's say, what would you say are some of what's next for Amazon in terms of technological developments, in terms of artificial intelligence? Is it in terms of robotics to optimize their warehouses? What are some of the, let's say, key high-level exciting?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. The general themes I would say are, because there's a lot of those bets and things in process, right? I think groceries an important part of our future. Grocery deliveries have been very strong this year, and we luckily opened up that as a free Prime benefit about this time last year. So we will have our own set of grocery stores. We have Whole Foods right now. We have this Go technology, which you can just, if you've never experienced it, you go in, just walk out. You grab something and just walk out. It's really amazing, versus how a lot of other companies have tried to solve it with self scanners at the end as you walk out, and people are annoyed. I run from that aisle too. I just I'll go to the human at that point. But when you have the Go technology, it's beautiful. But so grocery is an important part of our building the customer connection even further, because that opens up more of their wallet and more of their repeat purchases. Video content is not just an additional free, it's a free Prime benefit, but it is driving its own value creation. In a lot of our new countries, even countries we're not in, we have Prime members who join because of our video content. And then someday they'll have a shopping experience, right? AWS has it's still day one there, even though we're a $46 billion run rate business, more than twice as large as our nearest competitor. The migration to the cloud is still early for a lot of companies. A lot of them this year learned the lesson that they wish they had jumped in the cloud, because it turns generally a fixed cost into a variable cost. And that's good when demand goes way up or way down. So if it goes way up and you're not in the cloud, you probably can't satisfy that demand. Companies like Zoom, luckily, were AWS customers before this hit. If it goes down, travel agencies or travel businesses, you have fixed cost of data centers that's hard to get rid of. So that's one reason. That's your first, the bare minimum to get into the cloud. You go there because you get greater functionality, you get better security, you take advantage of the thousands and thousands of software engineers who work for us in that space, who don't work for individual companies. So those are all big things. I think on the sustainability side, our efforts to go carbon neutral, and we're buying fleets of electronic vans. We have our own investment with a company called Rivian in Detroit to make electronic pickup trucks. We are greatly expanding our solar and wind powered operations. A large portion of our AWS and now warehouse electricity needs are met by solar renewable energy. So, there's a lot of things that everything is probably going to be big in the next 5 years is kind of already in some form of incubation. But we have our eye out for that next thing that maybe will be big in 2030.
Thank you, Brian. This is fascinating. And at this stage, I think I want to also give an opportunity to students and attendees to ask some questions. So I think we'll call Michelle back to moderate the second part of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Professor and Brian. That was all super, super insightful. We have quite a few questions here, so we'll go in and jump into our Q&A session. So Brian, so you of course spent a large portion of your career at Amazon. Do you have any advice on pros and cons of taking this kind of career path? So specifically taking a longer term view with one company versus jumping from company to company frequently?
Yes. Well, I did work for two other companies, each for coincidentally around 6 to 7 years. And I think I found at those companies that by that point, I started to get bored a little bit. And I knew the kind of career path, and it was too slow in my mind. Like just things weren't moving quickly enough. Not because of my personal performance, just because of the structure of the company or something else. I've never reached that point at Amazon. It's 18 and be 19 years in April. So I think the analogy I have is it's like I'm climbing a hill, like a technical climb, with rings, and you're tying, so you don't look back, you don't look down, except for instances like this, where I kind of get a little introspective. But most of the time, there's so many tasks ahead of you that energize you that you don't get bored, and you don't necessarily look around for other jobs. So I would say it's different to work at a company like Amazon for 18 years than it might be at a more normal company that has more normal growth rates and things. You might run out of fun things, but if I'm in my early career, I would say what I think you should focus on are building skills, having a great attitude, and then looking for opportunities. If you all have great skills, you're building your skills by going to Columbia, and you'll pop out, some of the brightest, students in the world. What you do next, and what you've already done maybe before business school, is important, and you should pick your next role in a way that makes sense that you're building skills. Okay, you can chase money, you can make suboptimal decisions because it pays more, but I would be careful with that at this point in your career. My first job was $55,000 a year, which I think actually is out of business school, and I think that's $120,000 in today's dollars, which is not bad. But there's things that will pay you much more than that, and jump into a job for the right reasons, because you might regret it, and you don't want to plateau out early or stop learning. So look for like your maximum learning opportunity, and when you do that, have a great attitude, and if that means you have to change companies, to find new opportunities, I think you'll know that time is right. I would be careful not to jump too much, because there's unintended things that can cause you to have to change companies. A company gets bought or sold, I've seen good people whose resumes turn into train wrecks because they they leave for a couple reasons, and they use up their kind of movement cards, and then stuff happens, and by the time they're done, they've worked for 10 companies in 15 years, and it's a little hard to explain that. It's not always probably a sign that you've had the most stability in your life or your career, and it probably has all kinds of tangential impact on those around you if you have to move or relocate all the time. So anyway, it's a long answer. I'm not sure I answered the question, but
awesome. It's great to hear that you never got bored during your time at Amazon. So there was another question around, similarly, were there any moments when you came across a crossroad and you thought about leaving Amazon just very briefly? And if there were, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I spoke, there's a time when I was the number 2 finance person probably for like 5 years. And the CFO of the company was just a year or so older than me. So it wasn't clear that he was going to retire. And I did talk, when you're at Amazon and you're not the CFO, you get a lot of phone calls, and, it's happening today. And a lot of, people take them and they jump into generally things that are, more of a lottery ticket, maybe a new IPO, Airbnb, Zillow, Snap. Ford is not in that category, but I've lost people to really good CFO roles. When I was in that role, I did debate a few times going and doing something else. I'm glad I didn't, and really glad I didn't in hindsight, now, because It was a bit of a surprise when Tom retired. But, I think there can only be one CFO, right? And as much as you like the roles here, sometimes you want to be in charge of everything and be the face of the company. And I think the only unfortunate thing is there's one of those at every company. So if you really want that bad enough, it makes you consider other options. I would say we very rarely lose. I can't think of any people we've lost to lateral moves to be like a divisional CFO somewhere. Generally, what you're debating is, do I want to leave this culture where it's super invigorating, we're working on really big things, and it's a lot of fun. It's demanding, certainly, but it's a lot of fun. And go to another company where the culture might not be the same. I may get paid more. I may be the CFO, but boy, if the culture is not the same, it may not be worth the trade-off. So yeah, I looked at some things. In hindsight, I'm glad I didn't bite on any of them.
Amazing. Also looks like we have a lot of aspiring CFOs on this Zoom tonight. What advice would you give young professionals wanting to be a CFO at a technology company one day?
Yeah, I would say get ready to roll up your sleeves, because this is not about, we did a $10 billion debt offering in June. It was one of the biggest ever done. It was the lowest rates ever. And it's probably the 15th most impressive thing I've been associated with this year, right? So it's not about deal doing. It's not about doing acquisitions, although those are important. It's about running those acquisitions. So I think a lot of times people can get, really impacted by the glamour of some finance positions, doing deals. You're either funding things, and that has a role in life, right? You need to be able to borrow money and issue debt and raise equity, whatever it happens to be. You also have to invest well. And there's a lot of jobs that do those two things, right? This is a third rail of finance. This is like, I'm going to get in and I'm going to help create value. And it's not by buying something and merging into something else and having the cost structure. It's about, how do I create something the customer is going to like and build a business model that supports a good free cash flow model underneath it. And, I can point to a lot of things: prime offers, move to one day, expansion into India, developing our own transportation network, starting AWS, let alone running AWS, adding video and devices that seemingly have, no way to be monetized except through like purchases of soft lines and other things, or advertising. Buying, the list is long. If that's what you like, and you want to get in and get your hands dirty and run a business, build the metrics, be a right-hand man or woman to the person who runs it, that's fun. And if that pops, you may find that you like that so much, you want to be general manager of that business, or you want to go start your own business. And that's what I see. If you want to be CFO, I think you have to mix that with some understanding and knowledge around, corporate things, tax, treasury, accounting, investor relations. There's a very long list. I'm not an expert in those areas. I spent very little time in those areas up until 2015. But I do have great people at Amazon who are world-class in those areas, who will know more than, they'll have forgotten more than I'll ever know about those areas. And what I can do is make decisions on various options that they present and give me. And that's important. There's just very high stakes decisions being made. But I think I make them from an understanding of the business and our customers more so than, external factors like, will Wall Street like this, or will the rating agencies like this, or whatever. So not everyone, that's not everyone's favorite type of finance. I think some of the other areas of finance are actually riskier. Like I remember coming to Columbia a couple of years ago, and they told me about the Sales and Trading Club was the biggest club in 2005 and it doesn't exist anymore, right? So there's things that as I think, finance in general is making this transition from corporate finance to what had been called in the past, industry finance or in-house. But I'm here to tell you, it's like, it's very fun and it's very impactful, and it's another path to the top. So.
Awesome. And then on that note, we have a question on work-life balance here.
Yeah.
It's often said that moving to the C-suite is not a 2 times increase in scope, but a 10 times increase in scope. How have you managed such a huge job of family, personal life, and hobbies? And then I'll add to that, like, if you can elaborate on some of your hobbies so we can get to know your personal background a little bit.
Yeah. So sure. Yeah. I like my hobbies have morphed over time. When I had children in the house, that was more around coaching their teams and, spending time as a family. And we had some great, trips over the years. And we still do that even as they're semi-adults, one of whom's in your class. But, I've had more time for golf as I get older, boating, things like that. It is manageable, I think, and I'm cognizant of the climate that I create underneath me. Because if I'm sending people urgent emails on Friday night, I can go off and have a peaceful weekend, but they may not be able to, right? They may be sweating it and trying to reply to me by Saturday afternoon or something. So I think there's a way we all work hard. It's a very hard charging business, and it's more to work, and it's just trite, but it's more to work smart than to work brute hours. There are things that we have to work weekends on. But if we are doing that every week, we start to think there's something wrong with our prioritization and our workload. Another book I'd have you all read is forget the name of the 5. Sorry, I'll think of it. Julie's maybe on here; she can remind me. But we all read this book about time allocation and time management. And there's this magic quadrant that's about prioritization and urgency. And what you find out is that in the top corner of this quadrant is urgent and important. And you think, oh, that makes sense. That's stuff I'd work all weekend for. And you're right, that's important. But if you move over a quadrant, you find important, but not thank you. It's 5 Choices by Franklin Covey. You find a quadrant that is about importance, but not urgency. And you find that's where you make better decisions when you don't have a gun to your head, right? You're just like, you can step back, you can think things through thoughtfully, you have time to make a decision, right? So we look for places where we're doing things that are important on an urgent basis. And we say, why? There's probably a reason that sometimes the world just moves too quickly, but there's maybe I'm not organized as a manager or a leader. And that's what I teach my people is, look, you're not only trying to balance your own schedule, you're balancing the schedule of everyone who works for you, and you're creating a climate. Be careful what you inflict on that culture, because it's a hard charging area that people want to work long hours and they already are. You don't have to pile on top of that, or be careful when you do. So the 5 Choices by Franklin Covey, I would encourage you to read it.
Thank you for that. Looks like we have time for one more question. So I guess shifting to talk about just another important person in your life. Can you maybe give us a little bit of an insight as to what Jeff is like personally?
Yeah. Jeff likes to tell people that he works 3 years in the future. Everything he's working on is that's where he can add the most value, and he can catch things when they're at high leverage points in their infancy. And the other part of that statement is he kind of says this quarter's earnings were baked 3 years ago. And I get that. I take that a little personally, because I know there's like a lot of, operational excellence that drives actual performance in any quarter. But I get his macro level point that, the fact that we're in an AWS business, the fact that we started an advertising business, the fact that we built a successful Prime program, all of those things are going to have more to do with this quarter's or this year's income than actual operating deltas. But he does work on the future issues. Like when he set up this consumer business early in this 2010 period, Jeff Wilke and on the AWS side, Andy Jassy became co-CEOs, and they actually took on a lot of the day-to-day management of the business and metrics. Jeff then spends a lot of his time on things like devices, the video business, grocery delivery, Alexa. Alexa's a perfect example of something that, we just created. There wasn't a screaming need for it, but we see the use of your voice to control your computer or control data is an important thing for the future. And we're not monetizing it in any way right now. There's not a fee or anything associated with it. It doesn't generate a lot of additional sales, but it's a bet on the future. And that's the kind of thing that he spends his time on. So, I think he's very level-headed. I would say he's, especially at this stage of his career, he's very optimistic. He wants to say yes. He'll say no to things sometimes, but more so because it hasn't been thought through well enough or a solution's not totally been found yet. So he's more likely to kick things back for rework than he is to say, that was a stupid idea. He won't say that. So yes, I think Omar asked me earlier, what creates this invention factory and, the cycle of innovation? It's Jeff as much as anything else. If you're a junior, whatever, product line manager or manager, you're dying to run something big that you'll have a meeting with Jeff and the rest of the senior team and myself, and get to pitch an idea. So you can pitch an idea externally, you can pitch it to venture capitalists, and that works for some people, or you can pitch it internally and use the size and platform and resources of Amazon to help get that idea to fruition quicker. So now he's a great guy. He's really I respect he doesn't get mad at things. Like if I were him, like a lot of external things, I would be like, I get aggravated when, someone tweets about us or makes a comment or, overrules our Jedi contract at like the, Department of Defense is a random example. He's more practical, even keeled, but definitely focus on the customer at all points.
Thank you for that. I wish he was sitting here in this Zoom call with us. And so on that note, I guess that's a wrap for our Q&A session. Thank you so much, Brian and our professor, for such an insightful discussion. And thank you everybody for attending tonight's session. We look forward to seeing you at the next session of the series on Monday, November 30th, same time, 8 p.m. EST, featuring Mark Gallagher, co-founder and managing principal of Centerbridge Partners. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Omar.
And thank you, everyone.